Good afternoon, and welcome to a special podcasting event. Today, we are presenting a very special program called Saho Fa, Conversations with Doni Jo Minor Munro, featuring, you guessed it, Doni Jo Minor Munro, Yuchi tribal member, White Bison Master Facilitator, Traditional Spiritual Healer, Director of Urban Indian Education in Santa Maria, Santa Barbara Tri-County Area, California, and CEO, CFO of Our Children Are Sacred Incorporated, and most recently, Saho Fa, the organization that's really making a name for itself, not only in their home state of California, but also in Colorado, in New York, in Washington, D.C., our country's capital, and everywhere in between. Now, this new series falls into what we've been calling our Podumentary series, and that's a combination of podcast and documentary. Now, each of the 4 episodes of Saho Fa, Conversations with Doni Jo Minor Munro, is going to be a frank and hard-hitting look at the often unfortunate role and the treatment of American Indians throughout history. And yes, history also means right up to this present day. So Ms. Munro is far more qualified to speak on this. I'll be passing off the baton to her in just a moment, but I do want to say this before I do so. If you know Doni Jo, you know that she speaks from a place of passion and fire. Whether she's talking about the mistreatment of her people in the media and society at large, or the importance of education and life lessons for today's Native American youth, much of which she oversees personally in her jurisdiction. Point being, you know Doni Jo, and she's going to give it to you straight. She's going to give you a lot of information, maybe even more than some of you out there can handle. So you're going to want to listen to this podcast documentary a few times to make sure that you catch every little thing, because it's all important. I want to introduce the lady of the hour, Doni Jo Minor Munro. Welcome to your wonderful new podcast series.
Oh, Fashan, good afternoon. Happy to be here.
Oh, well, we're sure happy to have you. It's just wonderful, and we expect great things of this new program, and we know that you'll deliver. You'll exceed everyone's wildest expectations, and I mean everyone, too, because, whether you know Doni Jo or not, you can rest assured that this powerful woman, this champion of the Native American people, will deliver above and beyond what anyone is anticipating, and that's saying a lot, because expectations are always high. Now, before I hand it over to you, Doni Jo, I do want to give our listeners a little background. Maybe more than a little, but I feel it's important to have context of sorts. The ensuing program, it'll mean so much more to people if they know who you are exactly, what you've done, where you're going from here, because, we always have to assume going forward that there's going to be, on any given day, somebody who's never heard the program, somebody who doesn't know you. So we want to give a little bit of, paint a little bit of a picture, and then we'll get into the good stuff, or the reason people are tuning in. Here's a little history for you. Doni Jo Minor Munro is a Yuchi tribal member, and she's a traditional spiritual healer. She currently serves as Director of Urban Indian Education in Santa Maria, Santa Barbara Tri-County Area, California. In addition to Saho Fa, her newest organization, Ms. Munro is also the CEO, CFO of Our Children Are Sacred Incorporated, as I mentioned before. She attended the Oregon College of Education and is an advocate of urban Indian rights and also an advocate of Native American children. Ms. Munro believes in traditional Indian services Amongst some of the services is a traditional Native American pre-K through 12 school, healing ceremonies, ICWA family support, Healing with Horses program, and the Native Veterans Sweat Lodge program. She is affiliated with UNIC, USET, or USET, and the National Indian Education Association, the NIEA. One of her favorite quotes is, "The Creator hears us when we pray in our native tongue. Pray always and serve with humbleness." End quote. She was recently honored by the prestigious White Bison organization, a very big deal. This unique distinction is testament to her tireless efforts as a champion of the American Indian youth and culture overall. As a White Bison master facilitator, Miss Munro recently attended a Day on the Hill in Washington, D.C., which, if you don't know this, it's actually a 3-day event where Miss Munro and other influential Native Americans were able to make an even greater difference, to take greater strides for their people. Having the undivided attention of many of America's leaders and lawmakers, this has finally given Miss Munro the opportunity to advance her position, her cause, to the point where she'll be able to properly facilitate programs nationwide, and she aims to continue advancing her youth programs and educational agenda with the support of the House of Representatives and Senate, where she was invited to speak. So Doni Jo Miner Munro's Tsaho Fa organization also received some significant exposure as part of a pair of special billboard campaigns in Times Square, New York City. See, the organization was actually featured on those larger-than-life billboards right in central Times Square, arguably the two best spots there are, the Thomson Reuters building on an 11-billboard display, and right across the way, next door literally, the iconic NASDAQ market site Tower. Both extremely influential, hard-hitting advertisements for Tsaho Fa, and really helped spread the word. You can actually see them on the website where you're likely listening to this, unless you're listening through the news story. But if you want to go to the site, it's www.tsahofa.com. A lot to look at. So let's jump right into the deep end, because this is not a show for the faint of heart. We will be tackling some real issues with real language, unedited, raw, and real as it should be. One of the few places that people are able to do that in this day and age. So a lot of listeners already know, Doni Jo, that you were made White Bison Master Facilitator not too long ago, as I mentioned before, and this was followed by a pretty amazing cross-country trip for a Day on the Hill in D.C. And this was back in February, of course, but I do feel like it was such a landmark event, and it has surely dictated so much of what's followed and what's to come. So it's too big to leave out, in other words, and there's no documentation of it as yet in any sort of recorded format. And what better way to begin your new series? So just to get everyone up to speed, give us a little insight into A Day on the Hill and your personal experiences. I know you made a really big difference in D.C. It was all over the press. A lot of you listeners probably saw it for yourselves, whether it was on ABC or NBC websites all over the country. So let's hear it in your words, though, Doni Jo. Take us back to February, A Day on the Hill.
Okay, so usually the Native American Caucus is a 3-day event in which they ask Native people that have come to this meeting of the minds to go in to meet House of Representatives and Senators, to go directly into their offices and to give them bullet points on what's happening in Indian country, and to alert them to statistics and information that they may not have access to, or they may not really care about, but they need to know. So my job when I go there is, I feel, is to hit as many offices as I possibly can, and to actually go in and believe the sign that says, please come into my office and you're welcome to come here. Every senator and House Representative person has that little sign outside their door, and we take them at their word. So we go right into their office and hand them our information, but we also took our little tablets in with our website open so that they could see it visually what we do, and hand it to their aides so they could look it up and pay attention and get a good visual. Because a lot of times you can hand them papers, they get so much paper they just will stick it in the stack and not worry about it. Now, my main reason for going was because the Esther Martinez Language Revitalization Act was being reauthorized, and 2019 is considered the Year of Indigenous Language, which is a long time coming. Studies show that if we do not preserve our native languages with the greatest of haste and the sense of urgency that needs to be done, by 2050, there will be no native languages spoken in the United States or anywhere in the world.
Wow.
And that is something that we feel that has been the systematic application of the United States to do that to us in order to eradicate us as human beings. Without our language and our cultures and our traditions, they feel that they can assimilate us completely into the culture and will become part of this great melting pot, and they can do a cultural cleansing and washing of us and not have to go back and listen to or really think about how it is they came to invade this country. So my job, I felt, was to go and speak from my heart for the Esther Martinez Act, to explain to the congressional members that were there to listen, which there were quite a few, the passion behind why it is that we are so adamant about saving our languages and keeping our cultures intact without outside influences and without religious organizations controlling them. So during that time, right the day before, President Trump had made a really negative, nasty comment, so how he does with his tweeting for several days about the Trail of Tears, a bunch of crybabies.
Oh, yes,
I
remember that.
Maybe we should put them back on the trail. They had a really negative thing. I don't do Twitter. I can't listen to it.
Right.
I just got it off of the news, and was just absolutely shocked to think that someone could be that ignorant to say that type of a horrific type of conversation, not realizing, obviously, how many Americans that really truly affects. So in my family, I'm going to give you a brief history real quick. The Uchis, there were approximately between 1,500 and 1,800 that started on the Trail of Tears. Now, this is not a few-day walk that lasted. This lasted over 10 years or more for these people to walk from the southeastern part of the United States and to walk all the way into the Oklahoma territories. And if you ever look at the map to see how they took us on that walk there, it was a zigzag walk to try and get rid of many of us as possible so that not that many people would come to Oklahoma. The name of Oklahoma is a word that Oklahoma actually means the land of the red people. And their thought was that everything west of the Mississippi would belong to the native people as long as the grass grows and the rivers flow. Now, we know that didn't work out because of the manifest destiny, and when they realized that they couldn't stop the push of immigrants coming into this country, that they would just get rid of the rest of us and move non-native people into our area.
Yes.
My own family, that started on the Trail of Tears, there was originally 21 families that survived the walk into Oklahoma. Of those 21 families now, there are only 3 family units left. Of our native speakers, there are 9 fully fluent traditional speakers and about 20 to 30 more young children, teens, and 20-somethings that are learning to speak as fluent speakers. Our last fluent male speaker died about 3 years ago. His name was Kase Henry Washburn, and he spent his life giving to the people and sharing everything that he knew about any type of language to help preserve it. Maxine Wildcat now is our oldest elder. I believe she's about 92. She goes to the UT Language Project House in Sapulpa, Oklahoma, to help talk to the children. They have what they call a Doni, which is a baby program. So she goes every morning down there and talks to the babies in UT only and helps to teach the youngest children how to speak. Now, imagine not your 92-year-old grandmother or great-grandmother going down there and spending her day with little babies, just speaking her language so that they hear it, they know it, and they understand it, and it's part of how they think. There's a movement amongst Native American women to teach their indigenous languages to their children and to their babies first before they teach English, so that children learn to speak and think in Indian, not speak and think in English. Is fundamentally how we speak and how we are as traditional people is, I would say, in opposition to colonization and how non-native people are. So I'm not a great speaker. My son is a better speaker than I am. I'm teaching it to my granddaughter as much as I possibly can. I don't speak as well as I probably should because I'm part of that generation that has a lot of shame and guilt and nervousness built upon decades of being told that you're not Indian enough, you don't look Indian enough, which I do, but people have a certain misconception and visualization of how Native people should look, and if you don't have that high cheekbones and a certain nose, then you're not Indian enough.
Right.
But my feeling going to speak for that Esther Martinez Act is I want to speak directly to those senators' hearts, not to their minds, because their minds in D.C. get in the way of them completing any task that make them successful in getting anything done.
Right.
And in that bubble of D.C., they only know what is set in front of them. They are not really looking out at the greater United States or the people that they're actually representing, because they're living in this little tiny area and only talking to their constituents who really don't have a grasp or a grip on what's really happening in the nation. And that's just my own personal opinion. And especially in Indian country, it's something that they don't want to tread on because it's so controversial and there's so much historical trauma that goes behind it that it's just easier to stay away from it.
Right.
So the Esther Martinez Act is a competitive grant that in the beginning I think it had like 178 tribes applied and only 17 were awarded. This is our money. This money comes from the Bureau of Indian Affairs. It's interest off of land that they've taken from us that they're holding in trust for us because they don't believe that we're intelligent enough to take care of our own business. Money that's been set aside, say, for oil or resources or things that were found on our land that they confiscated or took or stolen. But it's not their money, it's our money. And they decide how it's distributed amongst our people through these competitive grants through non-Native organizations and people. So the Office of Indian Education, we visited while we were there. We did not find one Indian person working there when we went to visit. Every person that we came into contact with there was a non-Native. Mm-hmm. Even when we asked people if they didn't look Native, not to be racist, but to say, oh, what tribe are you from? They shied away from speaking about that at all and would not answer us. The person at the time that was running the Office of Indian Education came from Migrant Ed, and she had no clue as to what she should have been doing to help support Native people in these grassroots organizations that do these small little grants. Migrant Ed kids get between $5,000 and $8,000 per student to help that child through the year. Indian Education gets paid between $100 and $202 per child to serve them for the entire year.
Right.
But we are expected to perform at or above the migrant level expectations for our own children. Now, statistically, the trauma that happens within our Indian communities is the rates of victimization are so high. There are 84% of Native American people will be victims of assault, men and women.
Wow.
That is higher than any other race, and that includes Black people.
Yes.
I know that the Black Caucus comes in right after us, so we've had a lot of conversations with them because it was a kind of crossover there for a day. We had some really heated discussions and a lot of real good conversation about where we stand. And even Black people feel sorry for Native American people because even though they have a horrible time in this world, we have it rougher.
Right.
And I'm not trying to say that as if, it's a one-upper contest. It's just that they realize the victimization of our people has been going on for, hundreds of years, even long before they came to this country.
Right.
So with the Esther Martinez Act, I spoke my piece about the Trail of Tears and how there's only 3 families left, and that it was really inappropriate for him to degrade the people that came on that Trail of Tears that survived that. We teach our children that you should honor and respect those ancestors that lived and survived in order for you to be here. And you don't have the right to disrespect that. It was a long, arduous walk. The Trail of Tears was not because the Indians were crying on the trails. It was because the people that lined up to see the Indians coming through there were the ones that could not believe the atrocities of them carrying their dead babies, their dead elders, because they didn't want to leave their bodies behind because their spirits would have no place to rest.
Right.
They insisted on taking them into their new homeland so that they would be able to have their ancestors around them and their children, so their spirits would be resting with their people. So, and you can imagine that's quite gruesome. Not something that you really should be teaching, but that lesson is taught in the 5th grade. Along with school curriculum, you have to realize that everything that they teach children in school is a lie, or it's whitewashed. This new type of curriculum is what they're calling it, a cultural cleansing, and homogenizing and assimilating everyone into, we all need to be the same in order for us all to get along. And I take issue with that. I think that who you are by blood in your self-identity makes you a better person if you're confident and understand where you come from. You have a basic foundation of how you should act, what your survival skills are, your heart light is, where your soul resides, yes, and who your community is. And that's what makes you a stronger person as a child, as an adult, as an elder, by sticking together. Growing up in the town where I grew up, we have many diverse groups, and each culture was celebrated. There was Portuguese days, there were the Filipino days, we had Mexican-American days, we had the Japanese cultural fairs, all kinds of things in our area because we're a huge farming community. So we get, between the field workers to the packing houses to the distributors, that kind of thing for food. We had a large range of different types of people, and also a lot of Portuguese and Swiss Italians moved here for the cattle. Mm-hmm. So growing up, I grew up in an area where each race was celebrated and respected and honored, and those people that were in that group were held in esteem that kept their culture, their language, their traditions alive. With what's happening now, they want everyone to be the same so that we can all get along, and there won't be any pressure. You shouldn't be any race. You shouldn't see any color. But that's not the way the world is.
No.
I mean, people make judgments every single second. When you look at anyone, you make a snap judgment as to what they are, who they are, and probably, what kind of lifestyle they're living.
Right.
That's just the nature of human beings.
Of course.
I'm not saying that that's right, but that's the way it is.
Yes.
So with my speech to the Esther Martinez Act, I spoke in Yuchi as much as I possibly could, and the poor woman, I didn't realize they were having a stenographer there, and she just stood up and said, "Stop, all of you are speaking your native languages, and I can't do this. You're going to have to type it up and send it to me," because it was so overwhelming to her. There's probably 30 different people who were speaking our own indigenous languages, and there's no way for her to type that. If she can't speak it, she doesn't understand it. But my main point was, I, as an advocate for Native people, do not believe that we should have to compete for the money to save our languages and to keep our cultures intact. This is money that the U.S. government sits on year to year to year and makes people jump through all of these hoops to get these little tiny grants to support their grassroots organizations to keep their community organizations alive and to do stuff for the kids and to have places for the kids to go out for school, have breakfast programs, tutoring programs, getting them into college, making sure they have enough clothing to wear so they don't freeze to death, food for elders, that kind of thing. So when I spoke, my final thing was my great-grandmother, Katie Pickett, was on her deathbed, and she was speaking in her native language. She was talking to God. And her children are all standing around her, and they're begging her, "Mommy, Mommy, please speak English to us so we can understand you." That broke my heart. Every time I hear that story, it just shatters me to the bone to think that her own children couldn't hear what she was trying to say to God and to the other side while she was passing over, dying, however you want to say it.
Yes.
But they were not able to understand her. And my promise to my children is that if I pass from this life to the next, and I'm talking to God and you will know what I'm saying to the Creator.
Right.
You can see, here's our prayers when we speak in our native language.